The massive viewing screen in the council chamber showed Earth spinning lazily in the darkness of space, a blue and green marble that the Korthani Empire considered nothing more than a dumping ground for their worst criminals and exiles. Lyra stood in chains before the High Council, her silver skin reflecting the harsh lights of the judgment chamber. Her violet eyes, once proud and defiant, now stared at the floor as the chief magistrate read her sentence. Lyra Voss, formerly of the Science Division, you have been found guilty of treason against the Korthani Empire. Your unauthorized research into emotion amplification technology and your attempts to share this knowledge with lesser species have endangered our supremacy. The council members, 12 figures draped in ceremonial black robes, sat in a semicircle above her. Their faces showed no emotion, a trait the Korthani prized above all others. For 3,000 years, they had ruled their sector of the galaxy through logic, calculation, and the complete suppression of what they called primitive, emotional responses. The penalty for your crimes would normally be immediate termination, the chief magistrate continued, his voice as cold as the metal floors beneath Lyra's feet. However, the council has decided on a fate far more fitting for someone who values emotion over logic. Lyra finally looked up, meeting the magistrate's gray eyes. She knew what was coming. The whispers had reached her in her cell. Earth, the planet of emotional beings, the world her people mocked as a cesspool of irrationality and chaos. You will be exiled to Earth, stripped of all Korthani technology, and left to survive among the humans. Your emotional corruption makes you unfit for our society. Perhaps living among such primitive beings will finally teach you the folly of your ways. The council members stood as one, their robes rustling in the silence. The ritual of exile was ancient, dating back to the early days of the Empire. But exile to Earth, that was a new cruelty, implemented only in the last century when the Korthani had discovered the small blue planet teeming with emotional, unpredictable humans. 2 guards approached Lyra, their faces hidden behind reflective visors. They removed her chains only to replace them with the exile collar, a silver band that would suppress her natural Korthani abilities and mark her as an outcast to any of her kind who might encounter her. You have 3 days to prepare, the magistrate said. Use them wisely. Earth's atmosphere is compatible with our physiology, but nothing else about that world will welcome you. The humans are violent, irrational, and driven by their basest instincts. You will likely not survive your first lunar cycle. As the guards led her away, Lyra caught a glimpse of her former colleagues in the observation gallery. Not one of them met her eyes. Dr. Korvac, who had worked beside her for 50 years, stared straight ahead as if she had never existed. Her own bond sister, Sarah, sat rigid in her seat, her face a mask of indifference. The walk to her temporary quarters felt endless. The pristine white corridors of the justice complex stretched before her, each step echoing her isolation. Other Korthani passed by, their eyes sliding over her as if she were invisible. The exile collar had already marked her as dead to their society. Her quarters were sparse, a single room with basic amenities. On the table lay a datapad with information about Earth. Lyra picked it up, scrolling through the briefing that would be her only preparation for survival. Earth, Class M planet, 3rd from its sun. Dominant species, humans. Technology level, pre-interstellar. Warning. Humans exhibit extreme emotional volatility and form irrational attachments to individuals, animals, and even inanimate objects. Their decision-making process is fundamentally flawed, driven by feelings rather than logic. Avoid contact where possible. The irony wasn't lost on her. Her crime had been researching the very emotions that Earth's inhabitants displayed so freely. She had believed that the Korthani's suppression of emotion had stunted their development, made them cold and cruel in ways they couldn't even recognize. Her research had shown that emotions, far from being weaknesses, could enhance decision-making, creativity, and social bonds. But the council had seen only heresy. And now she would die for it. The next 3 days passed in a blur of preparations. She was given basic clothing that would blend in with Earth fashion. Strange, soft fabrics instead of the temperature-regulating suits of her homeworld. A translation implant was inserted behind her ear. Though she was warned it would only provide basic communication and might fail to convey nuance or emotional context. On the final morning, she was escorted to the exile ship. It was barely more than a pod, designed for one-way trips. No weapons, no advanced technology, Just basic life support and navigation systems that would deposit her at predetermined coordinates and then self-destruct. As the pod's door sealed, Lyra took one last look at the ship's view screen showing her homeworld. Corthon hung in space like a gray jewel, its surface covered in the geometric patterns of their cities. Somewhere down there, life would continue, as it had for millennia, ordered, logical, emotionless. The journey to Earth took 7 standard days. Lyra spent them reviewing the limited data available about her destination. She would be dropped in what the humans called North America, in a relatively isolated area to minimize initial contact. The briefing suggested this would give her time to adapt before encountering the violent, chaotic humans. When Earth finally filled her view screen, Lyra felt something she had only experienced in her forbidden research. A flutter in her chest that the humans might call anxiety or perhaps anticipation. The planet was undeniably beautiful, swirling with white clouds over blue oceans and brown-green continents. The pod's automated systems began the descent sequence. Through the small window, Lyra watched the stars fade as atmospheric entry began. The pod shook violently, heat shields glowing as they cut through Earth's atmosphere. She gripped the safety harnesses, her mind racing through survival protocols. The landing was rough. The pod's limited systems managed to deposit her in a forested area as planned, but the impact still jarred every bone in her body. Warning lights flashed as the self-destruct sequence initiated. She had minutes to gather the survival pack and exit before the pod destroyed all evidence of her arrival. Lyra stumbled out into Earth's sunlight, the pod door hissing shut behind her. The air hit her lungs, thick, humid, alive with scents her Corthani nose had never encountered. The gravity was lighter than Corthon's, making her feel strangely buoyant. She had barely made it 20 meters from the pod when the explosion came. The self-destruct was thorough, leaving nothing but scattered debris and scorched earth. She was truly alone now, cut off from everything she had ever known. The forest around her was unlike anything on Corthon, where her world's vegetation grew in orderly, predictable patterns. Earth's plant life seemed to explode in chaos. Trees reached in every direction, their branches tangled with vines and smaller plants. The sounds were overwhelming, chirps, rustles, distant calls of creatures she couldn't identify. Lyra consulted the basic survival guide on her datapad. Find water, seek shelter, avoid detection. The pad's power would last perhaps another Earth week before dying forever, another link to her past life severed. She had been walking for hours when she heard it. The sound of machinery. Engines, her translator suggested. Ground vehicles approaching. The briefing had warned her about Earth's primitive combustion-based transportation. She should hide, avoid contact, try to survive on her own as long as possible. But Lyra was tired, lost, and the silver tint of her skin would make concealment difficult. She stood frozen as the sounds grew closer, her mind calculating probabilities of survival that grew smaller with each passing second. The vehicle that emerged from the trees was large and red, with strange symbols on its side. It pulled to a stop, and several humans emerged. They wore matching dark clothing with reflective stripes, helmets on their heads. One of them spotted her and shouted something her translator couldn't quite parse. "Miss, are you all right? We got reports of an explosion out here." The human approaching her was male, her xenobiology training suggested. Tall by human standards, with skin darker than her own silver tone and eyes that seemed to show concern. She had studied human expressions in theory, but seeing emotion displayed so openly was jarring. Lyra's voice caught. The translator was working, but forming words felt strange. "I am lost." The man came closer, his movements slow and careful, as if approaching a frightened animal. His companions hung back, but she could see them watching, ready to act. Were they going to attack? The briefings had said humans were violent. "It's okay, we're here to help. I'm James, I'm a firefighter. We're not going to hurt you." He stopped a few meters away, his hands visible and empty. "That was quite an explosion. Were you camping out here? Are you injured?" Lyra's mind raced. She needed a story, something believable. But lies required understanding of context she didn't have. My transport was destroyed. I have nowhere to go." James's expression shifted, something her studies identified as sympathy. Okay. Let's get you somewhere safe, all right? You look like you've been through something rough. We can sort out the details later." He took another step closer, and Lyra instinctively backed away. Her heart was racing, another emotional response she rarely experienced on Corthan. Fear, her research had called it, but mixed with something else, as this human continued to approach with careful, non-threatening movements. "Hey, it's all right," James said softly. "I know you're scared, but we're the good guys, I promise. We help people. It's what we do," one of the other humans called out. "James, we should call this in. She might need medical attention." "Give me a minute, Rodriguez," James replied, never taking his eyes off Lyra. "Miss, what's your name?" "Lyra," she said, seeing no benefit in lying about that. "Lyra, that's a beautiful name. Look, I can see you're not from around here." His eyes traveled over her silver skin and unusual features, but there was no hostility in his gaze, only curiosity, and that persistent concern. "Maybe you're in some kind of trouble. But right now, all that matters is making sure you're safe. Will you let us help you?" This wasn't how the briefings had described human behavior. Where was the violence, the irrational aggression? This James was being kind. The word felt foreign in her mind, associated as it was with weakness in Corthani culture. "I have no choice," Lyra said finally. "I cannot survive alone." James smiled, a human expression of pleasure or agreement. "Sure you could, but you don't have to. Come on, let's get you to the truck. We'll take you back to town, get you some food, and a place to rest. Everything else can wait." He extended his hand toward her. Lyra stared at it, recognizing the gesture from her studies. Physical contact as a sign of agreement or greeting. On Corthan, touching was forbidden except for medical necessity. But she was no longer on Corthan. Slowly, carefully, she reached out and took his hand. His skin was warm, warmer than Corthani normal, and the contact sent an unexpected sensation through her nervous system. Not unpleasant, just different. "There we go," James said, his smile widening. "First step's always the hardest. Let's get you out of these woods." As he led her toward the vehicle, his hand gentle but firm around hers, Lyra felt something crack in her understanding of the universe. Everything she had been taught about humans, about emotions, about the superiority of logic, it all seemed suddenly uncertain. The other firefighters welcomed her with similar kindness, offering her water and a blanket despite the warm day. They didn't bombard her with questions, seeming to sense her discomfort. The one called Rodriguez even made what her translator suggested was a joke about the explosion, trying to ease the tension. As the vehicle rumbled to life and began carrying her away from her landing site and toward an uncertain future, Lyra found herself studying these humans. They communicated with more than words, touches on shoulders, shared glances, small gestures of support and camaraderie. Their emotions weren't the chaotic weakness the Corthani believed, but something else entirely. Something that bound them together. James sat beside her in the back of the vehicle, maintaining a respectful distance but clearly watching for signs of distress. "We'll take you to the station first," he explained. "Get you checked out by our medic. Then we'll figure out next steps. Do you have anyone we can call? Family? Friends?" "No," Lyra said simply. "I have no one." The sadness that crossed his features was unmistakable. "I'm sorry. That must be really hard." Hard. Such a simple word for the complete severing of every connection she had ever known. On Corthan, her response would have been logical acceptance. Here, surrounded by these emotional beings, she felt something else rising in her chest. Something hot and painful that made her eyes burn with moisture. Hey, James said softly, noticing her distress. "It's okay. You're not alone anymore, all right? We'll help you figure this out." The vehicle rounded a curve, and Lyra caught her first glimpse of human civilization, buildings of varied heights and purposes, vehicles moving in patterns that seemed chaotic but somehow functioned. Humans walking with purpose or leisure. It was nothing like the ordered perfection of Corthani cities, but it was alive in a way her home had never been. "Welcome to Cedar Ridge," one of the firefighters called back. "Not much to look at, but it's home. Home." The concept felt hollow to Lyra now, but as she sat in that vehicle, surrounded by humans who had shown her more kindness in an hour than she had experienced in years on Corthon, she wondered if perhaps the council's punishment might not be the death sentence they intended. The fire station was a modest building of red brick and concrete, functional rather than aesthetic. As they pulled into the bay, Lyra saw more humans in similar uniforms pause their activities to look at the arriving vehicle. Word had already spread, she realized. The strange woman found in the woods. Don't worry about them, James said, seeming to read her apprehension. Firefighters are naturally curious, but they're good people. We look out for each other here. He helped her down from the vehicle, that brief contact of hands again sending unfamiliar signals through her nervous system. The other firefighters kept a respectful distance, though she could see the questions in their eyes, her silver skin, the slight elongation of her features, the violet eyes. She was clearly not a typical human. Let's get you to the medical room, James suggested, guiding her through the station. Our paramedic, Sarah, she's the best. She'll make sure you're not hurt from whatever happened out there. The medical room was small but clean, equipped with basic human medical technology that seemed primitive by Corthani standards, but functional enough. The woman waiting there, Sarah, had pale skin decorated with small brown spots and hair the color of Earth's sun. This is Lyra, James explained. Found her out by the explosion site. She's been through something rough. Sarah's professional demeanor was tinged with the same warmth Lyra was beginning to recognize as characteristic of these humans. Hi, Lyra. I'm Sarah. I'm just going to check you over, make sure you're not injured. Is that okay? The concept of asking permission for medical treatment was foreign. On Corthan, medical intervention was mandated by logic when necessary. But Lyra nodded, finding something respectful in the question. As Sarah began her examination, James lingered by the door. I'll be right outside if you need anything, he said. And Lyra found his presence oddly reassuring. Sarah's examination was gentle but thorough. She noted Lyra's unusual skin tone and slightly different vital signs but didn't comment beyond ensuring nothing required immediate treatment. The burns from the pod's explosion had already begun healing. Corthani physiology was more resilient than human, but Sarah carefully cleaned and dressed them anyway. You're in surprisingly good shape for someone caught in an explosion, Sarah commented, her tone carefully neutral. These burns are minor, and you don't show signs of concussion or internal injury. I was fortunate, Lyra managed. Sarah studied her for a moment, and Lyra could see the intelligence behind those green eyes. This human knew she wasn't being told the whole truth, but she chose not to press. We all have our secrets, Sarah said softly, applying the last bandage. What matters is that you're safe now. James is a good man. If he brought you here, it's because he wants to help. Let him. The examination complete, Sarah called James back in. The two humans exchanged a look that communicated more than words. Sarah's subtle nod telling James that Lyra was physically well. His grateful smile acknowledging the information. So, James said, settling into a chair across from where Lyra sat on the examination table. What happens now depends partly on you. Do you have identification? Documentation? Lyra shook her head. The exile had been thorough. She had nothing that would establish an identity on Earth. James sighed but didn't seem surprised. That complicates things, but it's not insurmountable. There are procedures for undocumented individuals, but first, you need somewhere to stay. The station has a bunk room for overnight shifts. You could stay here for a day or two while we figure things out. Why? The question escaped before Lyra could stop it. Why would you help me? You don't know me. I could be dangerous. The smile that crossed James's face was tinged with something her studies had called irony. Could you be dangerous? Sure. But you're not, are you? You're scared and alone and trying to survive. I've seen dangerous, Lyra. That's not what I see when I look at you. That's illogical, Lyra said. You're basing your assessment on intuition rather than facts. Maybe, James agreed. But my intuition hasn't failed me yet. Look, here on Earth, we have this concept called paying it forward. Someone helps you when you need it, and someday you help someone else. It's not about logic or calculating benefit. It's about being human. Being human. As if it were more than just a species designation. As if it were a philosophy, a way of existing in the universe that prioritized connection over calculation. I'm not human, Lyra said quietly. James was silent for a moment, and she wondered if she had made a fatal error. But when he spoke, his voice was gentle. No, I don't suppose you are. Not in the traditional sense anyway. But you know what? That doesn't matter. You're a person who needs help. That's human enough for me. The burning sensation in her eyes returned, stronger this time. Her research had described this, the human crying response, tied to intense emotion, but experiencing it was different than studying it in abstract. The tears that escaped down her silver cheeks felt like a betrayal of everything Corthani. "Oh, hey," James said, moving closer. "It's okay. You're safe here, I promise." "I don't understand," Lyra said through the tears. "My people, we don't. Emotions are weakness. But you use them as strength. How?" James seemed to consider her words carefully. "I don't know about your people. But here, emotions aren't weakness. They're what connect us. They're why I became a firefighter. Because I felt called to help others. They're why Sarah became a paramedic. They're why any of us do anything that matters." He offered her a tissue, a simple gesture that somehow conveyed more comfort than all the logical arguments on Corthan ever had. "Look," he continued, "I don't know where you're from or how you got here, but I do know what it's like to feel lost. Everyone does, and the only way through it is together, so let us help. Stay here tonight. Tomorrow we'll start figuring out documentation, housing, getting you settled. One step at a time." Lyra took the tissue, wiping at tears she had never thought to shed. "And if I'm too different? If I can never fit in your world? Then you'll be different," James said with a shrug. "Earth's got 7 billion people and counting. There's room for one more unique individual. Besides, different isn't bad. Different is just different." A knock at the door interrupted them. Rodriguez peered in. "Hey, Captain wants to see you when you get a chance. And dinner's almost ready if our guest is hungry." "Thanks, Rodriguez." James turned back to Lyra. "You hungry? The crew's cooking tonight, which means it's either going to be amazing or terrible. No middle ground." Despite everything, Lyra found herself almost smiling. Another emotional response that felt foreign, but not unpleasant. "I should try to eat. That's the spirit. Come on, I'll introduce you to everyone. They're dying of curiosity but too polite to barge in here." As Lyra followed James out of the medical room, she reflected on the strange turn her exile had taken. She had expected death or at best a brutal struggle for survival among violent primitives. Instead, she had found kindness, compassion, and a complexity to human emotion that her people had never bothered to understand. The station's common area was filled with the sounds and smells of communal cooking. Several firefighters worked in the kitchen area, while others set a large table. They all looked up as James and Lyra entered, curiosity clear on their faces but tempered with welcoming smiles. "Everyone, this is Lyra," James announced. "She'll be staying with us for a bit while she gets back on her feet. Lyra, this is the crew. Rodriguez, Chen, Williams, Foster, and our captain, Captain Brooks." Each human nodded or waved as they were introduced. Captain Brooks, an older female with gray streaking her dark hair, approached with authority tempered by kindness. "Welcome to Station 12, Lyra," she said. "James tells me you've had a rough day. We're happy to help however we can." "Thank you," Lyra managed, overwhelmed by the casual acceptance. "I don't wish to be a burden." "Nonsense," the captain said firmly. "We've got space, and from what I hear, you need time to figure things out. Stay as long as you need." The meal that followed was unlike anything in Lyra's experience. On Corthan, eating was a solitary, functional activity. Here, it was communal, filled with conversation, laughter, and what humans called teasing. The firefighters shared stories of calls they'd been on, complained good-naturedly about scheduling, and included Lyra as naturally as if she'd always been there. The food itself was strange but not unpleasant, something called pasta, with a red sauce that her translator identified as tomato-based. The flavors were more complex than Corthani nutrition packets, designed for enjoyment rather than mere sustenance. "So Lyra," Chen asked during a lull in conversation, "what did you do before?" "Well, before?" It was delicately phrased, allowing her to share as much or as little as she chose. "I was a scientist," she said truthfully. "I studied theoretical connections between living beings, like sociology," Williams suggested. "Similar," Lyra agreed, grateful for the comparison. "I was interested in how individuals connect and influence each other beyond mere logical interaction." "Sounds fascinating," Sarah said. "Must have been challenging work." "It was," Lyra said, thinking of her destroyed research, her ruined career. "Perhaps too challenging." James smoothly redirected the conversation to safer topics. and Lyra found herself grateful for his perception. As the meal continued, she observed the intricate social dynamics at play. These humans had formed what her research would have called a tribal unit, bound by shared purpose and emotional connection. They protected each other, supported each other, found joy in each other's company, everything the Korthani rejected as primitive and inefficient. As the evening progressed, Lyra helped clear dishes, another communal activity that would have been handled by automated systems on Korthan. The simple act of working alongside these humans, participating in their rituals of care and maintenance, felt significant in ways she couldn't articulate. James showed her to the bunk room, a simple space with several beds for firefighters pulling long shifts. He found her clean bedding and showed her how the shower facilities worked. "I know this is probably pretty basic compared to what you're used to," he said apologetically. If only he knew. The Korthani lived in technological luxury that made even Earth's finest accommodations seem primitive. But there was something here that all of Korthan's advancement couldn't replicate. "It's perfect," she told him, and meant it. James paused at the door. "Try to get some rest. Tomorrow we'll start working on getting you proper documentation, finding you a place to stay, maybe even work if you're interested. It's going to be okay, Lyra. I know it doesn't feel like it right now, but it will be." "How can you know that?" she asked. "I don't know it," he admitted, "but I believe it. Sometimes that's enough." After he left, Lyra sat on the narrow bunk and tried to process the day's events. This morning she had been in a holding cell on Korthan, prepared for death or worse. Now she was in a firefighter's bunk room on Earth, surrounded by humans who had shown her more genuine care in hours than she'd experienced in years among her own people. The exile collar at her throat hummed slightly, a constant reminder of what she'd lost. But as she lay down on the simple bed, listening to the sounds of the station, voices in the distance, the occasional alarm, the presence of life all around her, she wondered if the High Council had made a miscalculation. They had sent her here to die among primitives. Instead, she had found something the Korthani had bred out of themselves generations ago, something that might be worth more than all their technological superiority. She had found compassion, as sleep finally claimed her, another biological necessity the Korthani viewed as inefficient. Lyra's last thought was of James's easy smile and steady presence. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, the reality of building a life on an alien world with no resources or connections. But tonight, for the first time since her arrest, she wasn't alone. And that, perhaps, was the most human thing of all. The morning sun, streaming through the station windows, was different from Korthan's pale yellow star. Earth's sun was warmer, more golden, and Lyra found herself standing at the window, mesmerized by how it painted the world in shades she had no names for. "Beautiful morning, isn't it?" James's voice came from behind her. He held 2 cups of what her nose identified as coffee, offering one to her. "Thought you might need this. First full day on Earth and all." Lyra accepted the cup, the warmth seeping through to her hands. She had tried coffee at dinner the night before and found it bitter but strangely comforting. "Thank you. I didn't expect to see beauty here." "No? What did you expect?" James leaned against the window frame, genuinely curious. "Chaos, violence, primitive squalor." She took a sip of coffee to hide her embarrassment. "My people have many misconceptions about Earth." "Your people," James repeated thoughtfully. "You know, you don't have to tell me where you're from, but I get the feeling they didn't exactly send you here on vacation." Lyra's hand unconsciously went to the exile collar hidden beneath her borrowed shirt. "No. This is permanent." James nodded, not pressing for details. "Well, their loss is our gain. Come on, Captain Brooks wants to talk to you about next steps." The captain's office was small but organized, walls covered with commendations, photos of firefighters past and present, and children's drawings thanking the fire station. It was a shrine to human connection, Lyra realized. "Lyra, please sit," Captain Brooks said, gesturing to a chair. "I've made some calls this morning. There's a woman named Dr. Patricia Chen, no relation to our Chen, who helps people in unusual circumstances get documentation. She's discreet and asks minimal questions." "Why would she help me?" Lyra asked. "Because that's what she does," the captain said simply. "Patricia came here as a refugee herself 20 years ago. Now she helps others navigate the system. James has volunteered to take you to see her this afternoon." "I did," James said, then caught the captain's look. I mean, yes, I did. Happy to help. The captain's lips twitched in what might have been amusement. In the meantime, we need to discuss your immediate needs: housing, income, integration into society. You said you were a scientist? Yes, specializing in theoretical behavioral connections. Lyra chose her words carefully. That's interesting. Cedar Ridge has a small college. They might have opportunities once we get your documentation sorted. For now, though, we need to focus on the basics. The meeting continued with practical discussions that would have been handled by automated systems on Corthan. Here, everything required personal interaction. Forms filled out by hand. Humans talking to other humans to make things happen. It was inefficient by Corthani standards, but there was something deeply personal about it. After the meeting, James drove her into town in his personal vehicle, a battered truck that had seen better days. The journey gave Lyra her first real look at human civilization in daylight. Cedar Ridge was what James called a small town. Buildings rarely exceeding 3 stories, trees lining streets, humans going about their daily lives with no apparent central organization. It's not much compared to big cities, James said, mistaking her fascination for disappointment. But it's got character. Good people, mostly. You'll see. Dr. Patricia Chen's office was in a narrow building squeezed between a bakery and a shop selling used books. The scents from the bakery made Lyra's stomach react in ways Corthani food never had. Another emotional response tied to physical sensation. Patricia herself was a small woman with kind eyes and careful hands. She took one look at Lyra's silver skin and unusual features and simply nodded, as if exotic visitors were perfectly normal. James called ahead, she said, ushering them into her office. Please, sit. Would you like tea? The office was cluttered but comfortable, filled with papers, books, and small objects from various Earth cultures. Patricia prepared tea with ritual precision, while studying Lyra with professional interest. So, she said, settling behind her desk with her own cup, you need documentation but have no proof of identity. This is not uncommon. May I ask where you're from originally? Lyra hesitated. James had been careful not to ask directly, but this woman needed some version of the truth to help her. Far away, Lyra said finally. A place I can never return to. I was exiled. For political reasons. Patricia's expression didn't change. I see. And your appearance, while striking, is unusual enough to draw attention. This could complicate things. I understand if you cannot help. I didn't say that, Patricia interrupted gently. I've helped people from many places, with many stories. Yours is unique, but not insurmountable. Tell me, what skills do you have? I'm trained in advanced theoretical sciences, behavioral analysis, pattern recognition. Lyra trailed off, realizing how little of her expertise translated to Earth technology. A scientist. Good. Education is valuable here. Can you learn new systems quickly? Yes. That, at least, was universally true. Patricia made notes in a language Lyra didn't recognize. Here's what I propose. We create an identity for you as a refugee from an isolated community. Cult survivors, we call them. It explains your lack of documentation and unusual appearance. Some groups practice extreme body modification. Your skin could be explained as tattoos or genetic condition. Lying, Lyra said uncomfortably. On Corthan, deception was inefficient, used only in extreme circumstances. Surviving, Patricia corrected. The story we create needs only to be plausible enough to allow you to exist within the system. The details of your past remain your own. She began explaining the process, forms to file, agencies to contact, the slow bureaucracy of becoming a legal person on Earth. It would take weeks, possibly months, but it could be done. In the meantime, Patricia said, you'll need somewhere to live. The fire station is generous, but you can't stay there indefinitely. I'm working on that, James said. My neighbor, Mrs. Rodriguez, different Rodriguez, common name here, has a garage apartment she's been thinking about renting. It's small but clean. Lyra looked between these two humans, strangers 24 hours ago, now organizing her entire life. Why are you doing this? Either of you? Patricia and James exchanged a look that communicated something Lyra couldn't interpret. Because someone helped me once, Patricia said simply. 20 years ago, I arrived here with nothing, running from a government that wanted me dead for teaching girls to read. A stranger helped me navigate this system. Now I help others. And you? Lyra asked James. He shrugged, seemingly uncomfortable with examining his own motivations. It's the right thing to do. You need help. I can help. Simple as that. But Lyra was beginning to understand it wasn't simple at all. These humans operated on a complex web of empathy, reciprocity, and emotional connections that created a safety net for those who fell. It was everything the Corthani system of pure logic rejected. Yet it worked. The rest of the morning was spent beginning paperwork, Patricia guiding them through forms that asked questions Lyra had no context for. Place of birth became unknown community. Date of birth estimated based on her apparent physical age, in human terms. Every blank field was a small fiction building toward a larger truth. She existed. She was here. She deserved a chance to live. Lunch was at the bakery next door, where the owner greeted Patricia warmly and didn't bat an eye at Lyra's appearance. James ordered something called sandwiches, and Lyra discovered that Earth food came in bewildering variety, each culture contributing its own flavors and traditions. So what was it like? James asked carefully as they ate. Your home? Lyra considered how to answer. Orderly, efficient, every person knowing their role and performing it without question. No crime, no poverty, no conflict. Sounds perfect, James said, but his tone suggested otherwise. It was, Lyra agreed, perfectly logical, perfectly cold. We eliminated emotional responses generations ago, viewing them as evolutionary flaws. My research suggested otherwise, but she touched her hidden collar. Such ideas were not welcome. James absorbed this, his sandwich forgotten. You were exiled for studying emotions? For suggesting they had value? For proposing that what you call humanity's greatest weakness might actually be its strength? And now you're here, surrounded by emotional humans. Must be like a scientist landing in their own experiment. The accuracy of his observations surprised her. Yes, exactly like that. And the initial data is not what I expected. What did you expect? Chaos without logic. Violence without reason. Instead, I find logic within the chaos, reason within the emotion. Your species shouldn't work, but it does. James smiled. We're full of surprises. Just wait until you experience your first town festival, or movie night, or birthday party. Humans have turned celebrating into an art form. The afternoon brought a visit to Mrs. Rodriguez's garage apartment. The elderly woman was James's polar opposite, tiny where he was tall, chattering constantly where he was thoughtfully quiet. She took one look at Lyra and declared her absolutely beautiful, like one of those models but better. The apartment was indeed small, a single room with basic kitchen facilities and a bathroom, but it had windows overlooking a garden, and Mrs. Rodriguez had furnished it with obvious care. The rent she quoted was suspiciously low. I know what you're doing, Lyra said to James as they walked back to his truck. What am I doing? The rent is below market value. You arranged this. You're probably subsidizing it yourself. James focused intently on unlocking his truck. Mrs. Rodriguez sets her own prices. James. She waited until he looked at her. I cannot repay this kindness. Nobody's keeping score, Lyra. That's not how it works here. Then how does it work? He leaned against the truck, searching for words. My mom used to say that kindness was like dropping a pebble in water. The ripples go out in all directions, touching shores you'll never see. Maybe you can't pay me back, but someday, you'll help someone else, and they'll help someone. And on and on. The mathematics of that are highly improbable, Lyra said. But she was beginning to understand it wasn't about mathematics at all. The next weeks passed in a blur of adjustments. Patricia worked her bureaucratic magic, slowly building Lyra a legal identity. The fire station crew adopted her as an unofficial mascot, finding excuses to check on her, invite her to meals, include her in their extended family of friends and relations. She moved into the garage apartment, Mrs. Rodriguez immediately taking her under wing. The elderly woman appeared at her door daily with food, gossip, and what she called motherly advice about everything from laundry to dating, despite Lyra's protests that she neither needed nor understood the latter. Nonsense, Mrs. Rodriguez declared. A beautiful girl like you, all alone. We'll find you someone nice. Maybe that James, eh? Such a good boy. Lyra's skin, which couldn't blush in the human fashion, tingled with what she was learning to recognize as embarrassment. James is a friend. Nothing more. Mm-hmm, Mrs. Rodriguez said, clearly unconvinced. Friends who check on you every day, who helped find you a home, who looks at you like you hung the moon. He doesn't. Lyra stopped. Did he? She was still learning to read human micro-expressions, the tiny signals that communicated interest, affection, attraction. On Corthan, mating was a matter of genetic compatibility and social standing. Here, it seemed infinitely more complex. Her integration into Cedar Ridge continued in small steps. The library became her sanctuary, hours spent reading everything from human history to fiction, trying to understand this chaotic species. The librarian, Mr. Okafor, began recommending books, delighted to have someone so eager to learn. You read like someone trying to inhale an entire world, he told her one afternoon, as she checked out another towering stack. I am, she admitted. This world is very different from what I knew. All worlds are, he said cryptically. Even the ones we think we know. Try this, Steinbeck. He understood humanity's beautiful failures better than most. She got a job at the college, initially just organizing research data for overworked professors. Her ability to see patterns, to process information at speeds that amazed her colleagues, quickly made her invaluable. Dr. Morrison, the psychology department head, began inviting her to attend lectures. You have an unusual perspective on human behavior, he said after she'd offered insights during a graduate seminar. Where did you say you studied? Far from here, Lyra said, her standard answer. My previous education was unconventional. Well, unconventional or not, you should consider formal study here. Your insights into social bonding mechanisms are fascinating. Social bonding, the very thing she'd been exiled for studying. The irony wasn't lost on her. 3 months into her new life, James invited her to a barbecue at the station. It's a tradition, he explained. First Saturday of summer. The whole town usually shows up. Lyra had observed human gatherings from a distance but hadn't participated in anything of this scale. The parking lot behind the station was transformed with tables, grills, and decorations. Music played from speakers, children ran between adults' legs, and the scent of cooking food filled the air. It's overwhelming, she admitted to James, surveying the crowd. Yeah, it can be. Want to find somewhere quieter? But before they could move, Rodriguez appeared, dragging a woman about Lyra's apparent age. Lyra, this is my cousin Maria. She's a teacher, loves science stuff like you. And suddenly Lyra was swept into the social current, introduced to person after person, each with their own story, their own connections to the web of Cedar Ridge. The sun began to set, stringing lights came on, and someone started a fire in a metal pit, humans gathering around it in a ritual older than civilization. You doing okay? James appeared at her elbow with a drink. I think so. This is intense. So many emotional connections happening simultaneously. Welcome to small-town life. Everyone knows everyone, for better or worse. She watched him as he surveyed the gathering, noticed how people gravitated toward him, how children ran up for high fives, how elderly residents patted his arm affectionately. They love you, she observed. James shifted uncomfortably. They love the uniform. Firefighters are heroes to kids, comfort to adults. It's not really me they see. I disagree. The words came out before she could analyze them. I've observed you for months now. Your kindness isn't performance or duty. It's who you are. He looked at her then, really looked at her, and Lyra felt something shift in the air between them. 3 months of careful friendship, of him helping her navigate this new world while maintaining respectful distance, and suddenly that distance felt both too much and not enough. Lyra, James, we need you on the grill. Chen's voice broke the moment. Williams is about to burn the burgers. James grimaced apologetically. Duty calls. We'll talk later? She nodded, watching him jog toward the grills where Williams was indeed producing concerning amounts of smoke. The moment broken, she found herself observing the gathering with new eyes. Couples moved in synchronized patterns, subtle touches and glances communicating volumes. Families clustered and separated and reformed in complex social dances. Confusing, isn't it? Sarah appeared beside her, holding her own drink. All the unspoken rules and signals. Extremely. Lyra caught herself before mentioning Corthon. Where I'm from, social interaction was more structured. Structured sounds nice sometimes, Sarah laughed. Less chance of accidentally dating someone's ex or insulting someone's potato salad. People get emotionally attached to potato salad? Oh, honey, you haven't lived until you've seen the Great Potato Salad War of 2019. Mrs. Henderson still won't speak to Mrs. Cooper. Lyra filed this away as another data point in human irrationality that somehow worked. Sarah, may I ask you something? Sure. How do humans know when friendship becomes something more? The biological indicators seem inconsistent, and the social protocols appear deliberately obscure. Sarah's eyes sparkled with amusement. Are we talking about anyone in particular? Theoretically speaking. Uh-huh. Well, theoretically speaking, humans are terrible at this. We give mixed signals, misread obvious signs, and generally stumble around, hoping the other person will make the first move. That seems highly inefficient. Oh, it is. But when it works, Sarah's expression softened as she looked across the yard at her own partner. When it works, it's magic. Magic. Another concept the Corthani had no use for, but watching the humans around her, their connections visible in every gesture and glance, Lyra was beginning to understand that some things couldn't be reduced to logic. The evening progressed with food, laughter, and eventually dancing as someone set up speakers playing something called classic rock. Lyra watched from the edges, still overwhelmed by the sensory input, until Mrs. Rodriguez appeared. No, the elderly woman said, taking Lyra's hands. No standing on the sidelines. Come, I'll teach you. And suddenly Lyra was moving to the rhythm, Mrs. Rodriguez guiding her through simple steps while others clapped encouragement. It was absurd. Moving their bodies to music served no logical purpose, but the joy on the faces around her. The laughter when she missed a step. The cheers when she got it right. It created something that logic couldn't touch. See? Mrs. Rodriguez said breathlessly after the song ended. Dancing is like life. You don't think, you just feel. James appeared as a slower song started, and Mrs. Rodriguez practically shoved Lyra into his arms with a wink that was anything but subtle. Sorry about her, James said, but he was smiling. We don't have to. I'd like to, Lyra surprised herself by saying. If you would. He positioned her hands, one in his, one on his shoulder, maintaining careful distance between their bodies. Fair warning. I'm not much of a dancer. Neither am I. We can be inefficient together. He laughed at that, and they began to move. The song was something about time and chances, and Lyra found herself hyper-aware of every point of contact. His hand warm around hers, his other hand light on her waist, the way he smelled like smoke from the grill, and something uniquely him. This is nice, he said softly. Yes. She could analyze why later. The neurochemical responses, the social bonding mechanisms, the evolutionary advantages of synchronized movement. Right now, she just wanted to experience it. The song ended too soon, and they separated, but something had changed. The careful distance James had maintained was still there, but it felt different now, intentional rather than automatic. The party wound down as families with children departed, older residents heading home, until only the core group remained around the dying fire. Stories emerged in the firelight. Embarrassing calls, close saves, the shared mythology of their station family. Tell Lyra about the turkey incident, Chen suggested, and groans rose from the group. No, James said firmly. We agreed never to speak of that again. Oh, now I have to know, Lyra said. What followed was a tale involving a escaped turkey, a grandmother's Thanksgiving dinner, and James somehow ending up in a tree wearing only his station pants and boots. Each crew member added details, contradicting each other, making the story more absurd with each telling. That's not even close to what happened, James protested, but he was laughing too. Then tell us what really happened, Lyra challenged. Never. Some mysteries are better left unsolved. As the evening ended and people began departing, Lyra helped with cleanup, falling naturally into the rhythm of communal effort. James drove her home, the truck cab comfortable in its silence. Thank you, she said as they pulled up to her apartment. For tonight. For everything. You don't have to keep thanking me. Yes, I do. On my world, I was considered defective for believing in the value of emotional connections. Here, You've shown me I was right all along. That deserves gratitude. James turned to face her fully. You were exiled for being right, for challenging the orthodoxy, for suggesting that what we'd eliminated as weakness was actually strength, for conducting research that proved emotions enhanced rather than impaired decision-making. She touched her collar through her shirt. For being too human in a world that despised humanity. Their loss, James said firmly. I mean that. Whatever world sent you away, they're idiots. The vehemence in his voice surprised her. You don't even know where I'm from. I don't need to. I know you. That's enough. They sat in silence for a moment. The weight of unspoken truths between them. James, she began. But he shook his head. You don't have to tell me. Not until you're ready. If you're ever ready. I want you to know that whatever your past, wherever you're from, it doesn't matter to me. You're here now. You're part of our community. That's what counts. The burning sensation behind her eyes returned. 3 months on Earth and she still wasn't used to the way emotions could ambush her physically. I should go, she said softly. Yeah, hey, we're doing training exercises tomorrow. Want to come watch? Might be fun to see us pretend to rescue Chen from various ridiculous scenarios. I heard that. Chen's voice came from across the parking lot. Lyra found herself smiling. Another expression that came more naturally now. I'd like that. She watched his truck disappear into the night, then climbed the stairs to her apartment. Mrs. Rodriguez's curtains twitched, and Lyra waved, knowing the woman was watching. Inside, she stood at her window looking out at the lights of Cedar Ridge. Somewhere out there, beyond Earth's atmosphere, Corthan continued its logical, emotionless existence. The High Council had pronounced her corrupted by emotion, unfit for society. They were right. She was corrupted. If corruption meant understanding joy, feeling connection, experiencing the full spectrum of what it meant to be truly alive. Every day on Earth proved her research correct in ways her sterile laboratories never could. Her reflection in the window showed silver skin that would always mark her as different. But for the first time since her exile, that didn't feel like a weakness. The next morning brought new challenges. Dr. Morrison had arranged for her to guest lecture in his advanced psychology course, her insights into social bonding drawing interest from faculty and students alike. Traditional models suggest emotional decision-making is inherently flawed, she said to the assembled students, trying not to think about how this exact thesis had led to her exile. But what if our models are wrong? What if emotion isn't the opposite of logic but another form of processing information? A student raised her hand. But emotions can lead us astray. Make us do irrational things. Define irrational, Lyra challenged. A parent sacrificing themselves for a child seems irrational from a pure survival standpoint. But from an evolutionary perspective, ensuring the survival of offspring is highly logical. The emotion, love, creates the behavior that serves the larger purpose. Another student jumped in. So you're saying, emotions are just evolution's way of making us do what's best for the species? I'm saying emotions are information. They tell us things about our environment, our relationships, our needs that pure logic might miss. The human tendency to form emotional bonds with unrelated individuals created communities. Communities created civilization. That seems highly rational to me. The discussion that followed was animated, students challenging and building on her ideas in ways that would have been forbidden on Corthan. There, education was about receiving accepted truths. Here, it was about questioning everything. After class, Dr. Morrison walked with her across campus. That was excellent. You have a gift for making complex ideas accessible. Have you considered pursuing formal credentials here? I'm not sure I could afford. There are programs for refugees, scholarships. If you're interested, I'd be happy to sponsor your application. Another kindness, freely offered. Why would you do that? Because you have something valuable to offer, and I believe in fostering talent wherever it comes from. Also, he smiled, selfishly, I want to keep you around. Your perspectives challenge my students in ways I can't. They parted at the campus gates, Lyra walking into town with her mind spinning. The life she was building here felt both fragile and solid, temporary and permanent. Every connection she made, every kindness she received, anchored her more firmly to this world. She stopped at the market for groceries, still marveling at the abundance and variety. On Corthan, Nutrition was centrally distributed, optimized for health. Here, food was about pleasure, culture, connection. She selected items carefully, planning to attempt cooking something for James, a reciprocal gesture, as she was learning humans valued. Lyra, a voice called. Maria, Rodriguez's cousin from the barbecue, waved from near the produce section. How are you settling in? Well, thank you. Social pleasantries still felt formal in her mouth, but she was learning. How is your teaching? Oh, trying to convince teenagers that literature matters. Hey, I'm actually glad I ran into you. I'm organizing a book club and thought you might be interested. We meet monthly. Very casual. Another invitation, another thread in the social web. I would like that. Great. I'll send you the details. We're reading Margaret Atwood next month. Sci-Fi with social commentary. Thought it might appeal to the scientist in you. They chatted briefly about books and teaching, and Lyra found herself relaxing into the conversation. Each interaction became easier, more natural. She was learning the rhythms of human connection, when to speak, when to listen, how to show interest without seeming intrusive. At the fire station, the crew was indeed running training exercises. Chen was strapped to a board, pretending to be injured, while the others practiced extraction techniques. James waved her over, grinning. Perfect timing. Want to be our next victim? I mean, volunteer? That depends. What does it involve? Just lying there while we practice moving you safely. Very boring, really. It wasn't boring. Being strapped to the board, lifted and maneuvered by the team working in perfect coordination, gave her new appreciation for their skills. They communicated with minimal words, each knowing their role, trusting their partners completely. See? James said as they freed her from the board. Nothing to it. Though you're easier to move than Chen. He keeps trying to help. I'm being realistic, Chen protested. Real victims don't lie still. Real victims also don't critique our technique while we're saving them. William shot back. The easy banter continued as they moved through different scenarios. Lyra observed how they balanced seriousness with humor, maintaining focus while keeping morale high. Another form of emotional intelligence her people had abandoned. During a break, she found herself helping Sarah organize medical supplies, learning the human names for equipment that seemed primitively simple compared to Corthani technology, but served its purpose effectively. You're good at this, Sarah noted. Ever consider medical training? We always need more EMTs. I don't think I could handle the emotional aspect, Lyra admitted. Seeing humans in pain. Yeah, that's the hard part. But it's also the rewarding part. Being there when someone needs you most. Making a difference. Sarah paused in her sorting, though I guess that's true of whatever you do. Your lectures, teaching, that makes a difference too. Everything connected here. Every action rippled outward, affecting others in ways both seen and unseen. It was beautiful and terrifying and completely opposite to Corthan's rigid isolation. That evening, Lyra attempted her first real cooking experiment. The recipe seemed simple enough, but she quickly discovered that season to taste and cook until done were frustratingly vague instructions. She was staring at a pan of something that looked nothing like the picture when her door chimed. James stood there with a pizza box. Mrs. Rodriguez called. Said you might need backup. That woman sees everything, Lyra muttered, but stepped aside to let him in. He surveyed her kitchen disaster with barely concealed amusement. What were you trying to make? Chicken parmesan. The internet lied about it being easy. The internet lies about a lot of things. Pizza? They ate at her small table, the failed cooking attempt abandoned for now. James helped her understand where she'd gone wrong, turning it into an impromptu cooking lesson that had them both laughing as he demonstrated proper breading technique with dramatic flair. You know, he said, as they cleaned up together. You don't have to prove anything. Not to me. Not to anyone. I'm not trying to prove, aren't you? Working so hard to fit in, to be useful, to justify your presence here. His voice was gentle. Lyra, you're allowed to just exist. To learn at your own pace. To be different. She focused on drying dishes, avoiding his eyes. On my world, you earned your place through contribution. Personal value was measured in utility to society. That sounds exhausting. It was efficient. Not the same thing. He took the plate from her hands, setting it aside. Look at me, please. She did. finding his brown eyes full of warmth and something else she was still learning to identify. You have value just by being you. Not what you can do, not what you know, not how useful you are. You. That's enough. The words hit her like physical blows, each one cracking the conditioning of a lifetime. On Corthon, she had been valuable only as long as her research produced results. The moment she had challenged the system, that value evaporated. But here, I don't understand that, she whispered. I know. But maybe understanding isn't the point. Maybe it's just something you have to feel. Feel. Everything came back to that. The one thing the Corthani had tried to eliminate, the thing that had led to her exile, the thing that Earth was teaching her to embrace. Later, after James had left with promises to give her proper cooking lessons, Lyra sat at her window again. The exile collar hummed against her throat, a constant reminder of what she'd lost, but increasingly, it also reminded her of what she'd gained. Tomorrow she would wake in this small apartment in this small town on this small planet. She would teach students to question rather than accept. She would strengthen connections with humans who had shown her kindness without calculation. She would continue learning what it meant to feel. The High Council had sent her here to die among primitives. Instead, she was learning to live among teachers disguised as a chaotic, emotional, gloriously imperfect species. Every day brought new data that confirmed her original hypothesis. Emotions weren't humanity's weakness, they were its greatest strength, and perhaps, if she was very lucky and very brave, they might become hers as well.